Hello, and welcome back to Where the Veil Grows Thin. I am Sean Jung, your host, and I am happy to be here again with my good friend, Ben Leroy, joining us from his own podcast site, Collaborist. We never imagined that this would turn into a somewhat common theme, Ben and I discussing things about life and death and all that falls between and outside of those two demarcations. But he has so graciously offered to do the occasional taping of an episode for this website. You can also, if you haven't already, you can find me on Substack, where just about every Tuesday I publish some small bit of writing about the things I find meaningful and thought provoking and important from my own living of this particular life. Earlier this week, Ben and I were talking about the way we can sometimes make ourselves fit into the image that we think people have of us, and the burden that can create in our lives. And then the painful struggle that it is to break free from the confines of fitting into a mold that just doesn't fit all the time. Staying seated on a pedestal that you're pretty sure you never deserved to be on in the first place is hard and time consuming and exhausting. And then there's the shame that can accompany all of that when you fall off. And that's where we kind of left it when we were talking earlier this week. And we said, oh, why don't we do a podcast about this? So here we are. Ben, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Sean. When we had this conversation earlier in the week, I started thinking about an earlier episode that we recorded, and it was an episode that I think you thought about much more once it was done, because I remember you reaching out and we kind of had a debrief about it. But I had brought up what it was like to feel like in the moment when somebody needs us, that we will fail them, that we are not going to rise to the occasion when the occasion asks of it us. And to me, what we're talking about today and what we talked about earlier in the week very much fits in with that same thing. Is this going to be the time that people are expecting a result and I'm incapable of doing it for whatever reason, and I'm going to let down people who expected me for whatever reason to be able to do whatever the thing was? And it is such an honor to be a trusted person in a person's life, to be a person that people turn to when they are in a moment of crisis or a moment of need. But you are right that it is also scary, and sometimes we're more exhausted than we feel comfortable letting on. And um, that is a spot that I think everyone at some point will find themselves in. And I think that we're just kind of exploring it. Well, initially, what kind of got us on this topic was, loosely speaking, we kind of explored the concept of people wanting to know the full version of us, the truth of us, and that sometimes we don't want to divulge that because we do have our insecurities, our doubts. And if we answered things honestly, where people might be expecting a heroic response, they instead might see a cowering mouse who just is trying to get through the day. And so I want to throw the question to you, because you find yourself often around people in much more extreme circumstances than I am. And I want to kind of revisit the question of a few episodes ago, where do you see a connection between people's expectations and your own thought about rising to the occasion? And what sort of stress does that give you?
Oh, well, one thing you said just now that I thought about earlier today is how when you said something about that you imagine all people find themselves in at some point in their lives. And I have to keep reminding myself of that. Everyone has elements of thinking that they're going to let somebody down or they're not going to measure up to the expectation when they show up for something. So I think that that's something that helps to remind us that we're not special in feeling that way. Now, when we have a public sort of persona, we have a job that we go to. We also have the personal us that we show up to friends. We show up with friends, and that's a much easier place because you can just be whoever you are if they're good friends. I think when you have a public persona image, or you think you have an image, a certain image, you what I have found is that I find myself narrowing down who I want to spend time with on a social basis, who I feel like I can be myself with, and be accepted. And I can be real. I can say whatever's on my mind because I know I never have the intention of letting someone down or being unkind. So I don't have to worry about that. I know that I can do both of those things very easily because I can be sarcastic or I can be flippant and and so I'm mindful of that, but I don't have to watch myself. In my professional life, when I worked a shift at the hospital today, and I was getting out of the car in the parking lot, and my phone, this certain app we have on our phones, went off, and a chaplain was being requested by a family in critical care. And I knew it was early enough that I was going to be the only chaplain coming to the hospital that early. And so I wrote, like I said, I'm walking in, I'll come right up. And I knew what I was walking into. I knew from the message on the phone that someone was dying. And I didn't know I was going to walk into two things. The room my own husband was put on a ventilator and airlifted out of 5 years ago. So that room always brings stuff up for me. And the fact that there were going to be 9 family members sitting in a circle, all their knees pulled up against the bed. It was just beautiful. It was a beautiful experience. But walking in, I was thinking, oh my gosh, they're thinking they're going to get some religious person. They're thinking, and I had to stop and just remember, I know what I'm doing. And we talked about this a few episodes ago when this came up, that I don't suffer a lot with that personally in my life, that I'm not going to be enough because I believe in something that I carry with me when I go in there, that I carry with me everywhere I am. And I really believe that, I think, I know I'm jumping all over the place. You also mentioned if you're too tired, you just don't have the energy to give to a friend in need, but you go, because you don't want to disappoint. Um, I'm not too tired. I was headed into work anyway. It was my day to be there, and I don't feel alone in the work that I do as a chaplain. I don't feel alone. So I I just trust that I will find what they need if I'm not it. And I offered, to have, if there was a particular faith, and they said, no, no, no. And somehow we just started telling stories about this woman, and everybody was laughing and crying, and it was perfect. It was perfection. And after about 30 minutes, I stepped out and said, I'll just be right out here. And, she died shortly thereafter. And I got lots of hugs from the family a couple hours later when they were all leaving the hospital. I happened to be crossing paths with them in the hallways. And there were more tears and so much gratitude. And those kinds of experiences tell me, okay, I just have to trust. I just have to trust if I'm a chaplain at the hospital and I'm called to the hospital, it's going to be okay. We'll figure it out. So, but there's that private part of, I think today's episode came about because I was telling you about a book that my daughter gave me for Mother's Day. That's the title of the book is Mom, I Want to Know Your Story. And it's this whole book with questions and lots of room for writing. And I've been thumbing through it, looking at these questions, thinking, gosh, if I want to answer these honestly, I want her to know about my life before I was a mom, before she came. But if I answer everything really truthfully, is she going to be disappointed in me? Because, I mean, there's parts of my life I'm not particularly proud of, but the questions are in the book. And I could skip the question, or I could figure out a way to skirt around being perfectly honest. But that was, I think that's what got us going down this road most recently, was that I feel like she has me, not the world and not the community, not anyone else really, but she has me on a little bit of a pedestal, and I want to stay there. I want to be that person, and maybe, and maybe I can be. Maybe answering the questions honestly are going to be what keep me there. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. It makes sense. It also feels a little bit at odds with something that you said earlier, and I was gonna stop you, but I wanted you to be able to talk. The comfort of friends and the people that we know that we can be around and be our true selves, and they know us, and we don't have to go into our backstory because they're already up to speed. You said how good that environment was because of the love and the trust. But with the issue that you just brought up, is there a little bit of a case of we want the comfort of those people, and we know that maybe their understanding of us in totality as a person is not fully accurate? Or we have the same thing that you worry about with your daughter, like if they really knew how I felt about all of this,
Oh,
would it
yeah.
change?
Maybe. I mean, there could be an element of that. I know that there aren't people that, like, there aren't many people that I care totally to, like, people don't care about my childhood. They don't want to know everything I did as a teenager and, all of that. And maybe, if somebody wanted to know, I'd probably tell them. But this is my daughter. And there are things that the book is asking of me that I've never talked to her about. So there's just, maybe it's a mother-daughter thing, um, and not just a, human thing that we all go through. But I do think that there are friends that you get to know who the friends are, that you really truly can just be yourself. You can just relax and be yourself and be accepted and be safe. I think one of the things that happens to us in our adult lives is that we occasionally run across a circumstance where we thought we were safe and we thought we could be ourselves, and then it comes back to haunt us somehow. Um, and that and maybe that means that we're not living that fully authentic life everywhere we go. Anyone we come across and have a conversation with, everybody would feel exactly the same way because we don't ever hold anything back. We're always just who we are. But I don't know how many people actually do that, who actually can do that.
If they can, they're a different breed. I don't know anyone who feels consistent across all interactions
So you
with
get what
other
I'm
people.
saying, right?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I
Too.
also and I also think if it's not the shame, it's at least a thing for me to consider, is that I am reasonably certain that if you took the 10 closest people in my life outside of my family, but the 10 closest people to me in my life, and you said, "Who is Ben?" And they answered the question, that there would be some people whose answers are unrecognizable or at least very distinct from each other. It wouldn't be like, oh, these are Ben's 5 traits.
And
And
everybody would say the same
that would be
things.
right, right. And so I ask myself sometimes, why do I let this person know me under these terms? And they're like, whatever terms I'm offering, I'm giving the full authentic version of myself. I'm giving the authentic version of myself. I don't know that I'm giving the full version of myself. And I think that part of that is, if I dig a little bit deeper, what we're talking about, because there are some people by just circumstance who are in my life where the dynamic is such that I am somebody who they can rely on in tough times, that I am a rock for them in those moments. That is how I show up for them. And if you said to them, does Ben have any issues that he struggles with or that he has any problems with? They'd be like, no, like he doesn't. And he's just there and shows up for other people. And so there are other people who know that no, Ben struggles with a lot of things. Ben definitely has challenges. And so I ask myself, like, well, who knows me more authentically? I don't know. And why does the person who thinks that I'm there for them and they can rely on and I am steadfast in that way, what would they think if all of a sudden they were told, "Oh, you didn't know that Ben's dealing with these issues?" Like what would that make them feel? Like that would they think that I am withholding myself from them, or would they get into their own version of shame where they would say, "Why haven't I ever asked?" or "Why hasn't he shared that with me?" These are all those questions that got brought up by what we were talking about, and how do people really know us, and what do they expect from us, and how do we affect their expectations?
You a minute ago you said something, I wanted to ask you about it. You said if you took the 10 closest people to you outside of family. Why outside of family?
I don't know, because as soon as I made that distinction, I was like, why? It's just as applicable to family as it
I
is to
think it
everybody
is.
else.
I do. I think it
Yeah.
is. They've known us longer than anybody. Um,
Yep.
and they've seen us grow up. They've seen us go through all the things it took for us to get to it, at least until we left that home unit. And then they didn't see everything. So then we can sort of, pick and choose what we want them to know about what we've experienced and what we've experimented with and where we've been and who we've been with. And so the whole thing is just a puzzle to me, a good puzzle,
Yeah.
not a liberty puzzle, but a
Hmm.
good puzzle. um,
Yeah.
and I think it is a commonality among most people, that most people probably have this sense that they don't want to disappoint someone that they think looks up to them, and
Yeah.
so they will try to make themselves fit into that vision. And sometimes that can be a good thing for us because it brings us to our higher and greater good. If the person that we think they see us as is a good person, I want to show up as a good person, and so I do, and it helps me be a good person. So maybe it's a good thing a lot of times and not necessarily a bad thing.
But what emotional and psychological and psychic toll can it, in some occasions, take on you when you are not feeling up to the role and yet you play the role?
Big. Those are big. It's a big cost.
Yeah, because there are definitely times where I want to say, okay, I give up. this world is crazy and it's out of control, and I don't know what to tell you because we're on a bad roller coaster and it's run by the worst carnies and there are serious dangers. But I know that if I say that, I'm just adding to a chorus that's making doom feel inevitable, and I don't want to give that chorus. So I lie out loud when I say, no, it'll be okay. Like I don't know that it's going to be okay. Like I'll show up and I'm going to hope it's okay, but then it's in those moments where I'm playing the role that is expected of me and it's completely at odds with what I am internally feeling, and what stress does that put on us?
Wow, that's a really good point. It's a great question. I think many of my peers and friends, coworkers, many of us are doing that right now because we do feel the despair, we do feel the fear, we do feel the disruption of harmony and security in our lives, and yet we don't want to feed that wolf. We want to feed the wolf who is good and calm and it's all going to be okay. The, that wolf. And so I think many of us are doing that, and not very many of us are necessarily questioning what toll is that taking on us.
It's another one too where socially I think that the idea of being vulnerable is sometimes disincentivized because vulnerability is weakness. And if we think that there's a monster lurking behind everything, then we don't want to be vulnerable. And we definitely don't want to be weak in front of the monster. So even though it is the thing that is calling to us from the deepest place of our spirit and our bones, that I'm tired and I'm weak and I'm scared and I'm vulnerable, and I want the comfort that can be given by other people, even if I don't know exactly what it is that's going to even be comforting in that moment. I want to cede control of being expected to be a part of the solution to the situation in that particular moment. And yet we we continue on and we do what we can to keep up the line, and that's I think that that takes a toll.
I for some reason Sonia just popped into my head. I'd like to invite her to come back and maybe continue this conversation in another episode, and that particular piece of it, because I think she and I are very like-minded. I don't know if anybody listening or watching right now remembers the episode that the three of us did, but I'd like to invite her to come back and talk about this some more. It isn't a question I had actually stopped and asked myself, because I find myself experiencing certain emotional hiccups that I'm not familiar with in my own life. And I've been telling myself that it is sort of a caregiver brain. Like I'm juggling too many bowling balls. I'm trying to trying to control too many things that I don't have any business trying to control. I'm not entirely sure. But your question really opened up a thought about, wow, is that what I'm doing? I'm presenting to the world the thing that I want to see grow in the world, but internally, I'm
Yes.
not feeling it.
Yeah, it's the fake it till you make it strategy, and it's also on the biggest, most existential platform that we can. It's life.
It's life.
We are trying to create the world that we wish we inhabited,
And that we
and
wished
to
we would,
do that,
yeah, that our kids were going to inherit, or our nephews and
hmm
nieces, or, the people that are left when we die, whatever
yeah,
world we leave behind, we want it to be better than it feels like it is right now.
and, and we know that giving in to despair is detrimental to that cause because it can create contagious doom. We talked before about metastatic joy, the same concept I think with doom and with paranoia and sadness, and um, you know, I maybe this is for a different episode too, but it's even there's something perversely satisfying about talking of despair with others, talking about how bad things are. That becomes a conversation that we participate in, even if we know that it's not healthy for our brain, it's not healthy for our approach and our angle on life. But we do it because in the moment we just want to say, yes, I'm scared. I too have human emotions and I'm not sure what the answer is. But for people who are expected to have the answer, to be able to say, I don't have the answer. Not only is there the fear of disappointing others by admitting that, but there's the shame of now you are seen for who you really are. You don't have the answers. You're not Superman. You're not infallible. You're not invincible. And now you have reduced yourself to this scared husk of what people thought was not that. And that's liberating, I guess, in its own way as well. Because, okay, now you see me for who I am, and I don't have to keep up the illusion of something that I'm not. But that's also our currency. Our currency is to be able to show up and say, oh, okay, I'm here. I'm here to solve the problem. And so when that currency gets devalued because you say, actually, this currency is worthless because it's not real, that's that's a place.
It's interesting when you were talking about that sharing the sorrow, the sadness, the difficulty, the fear. I I can see doing that with one person at some chosen, truly trusted friend to be able. I think it's important for us to be able to say exactly what you just said. I don't have the answers. I am scared. I'm just like everybody else. And I think it's equally important or more important for us to then show up out in the world with that hope, with that trust, and with that not a promise that everything's going to be okay, but we know that where we put our energy is what grows. So if you get into this
Hmm.
triangulation with a bunch of people about, oh, woe is me, and the sky is falling, and that everything is going to shit, and there's no hope, let's all just drink the Kool-Aid and fall in the pit, then that's will be what happens. That's going to be what
Right?
grows, is that energy of fear and scarcity and uncertainty and anger and hatred. I don't want to be part of that. And yet I
You
also
know?
don't want to pretend like I don't ever feel it. I feel it. I just don't want to give it energy. But I think it's important
Yeah.
to have somewhere that you can do that, so that you know that there's somebody out there who really sees you.
I think too, there's this, if I'm honest, there's this issue around ego. And if we think that our role is to be the problem solver, then what we're doing is not creating space for other people to be the problem solver because everyone's going to have their role. And so we think that we can't show weakness because we somehow are the one link on the bridge holding the whole thing together. But as we've both seen in life, there is a beauty that when the chips are down, somebody else is going to find their feet and they're going to find out that, oh, yeah, I am here now to solve Ben's problem or Sean's problem. Or if not solve, I'm going to bear witness to them when they are in their moment of that. And that's the superior outcome. It's just that we don't always have faith that if we let go, that's what will show up.
Yeah, we need to have that faith, that
We
we
do.
can. We There was an exercise we used to do, and then we have got to wrap this up because we're going to go too long, and people aren't going to
Yeah, we
listen to
do.
us. We have
We
so
are
much
long
to
winded.
listen. Yes. So there was an exercise we did way back when I first started working in the hospital. Big circle of people, maybe 15 people in a big circle. Somebody had a giant ball of yarn. She held one end and she threw the ball to somebody in the circle. They held that piece and threw the ball until there was this giant web. We'd created a big web, and then the facilitator dropped her end and stepped back, and without even talking or thinking about it, everybody took a step back and tightened up on their string so that they held up the bridge. That's what we do. And we have to allow for that. We have to allow for people to experience that. You're absolutely right. And so, yeah, it's a beautiful exercise
Okay.
to do on team building. I don't remember what we called it, but that's what it was about. And it was just about helping people recognize that we don't have to be the whole bridge support. If we have a bad day, somebody's going to come in and we have to trust that. And you're right, it's about ego. If we truly think that's not going to happen, that if we die, the earth is not going to continue to rotate on its axis, we're living in la
We're
la.
deluding ourselves. Yes. So for people who are interested, you can find Where the Veil Grows Thin wherever you find your podcasts and also on YouTube. Sean has a wonderful Substack also called Where the Veil Grows Thin that you should subscribe to if you haven't already. And if you have questions or comments you would like to make and you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead and put them in the comment section, or you can email them. Thank you, Sean. It is always a good exploration of self and community to speak with you.
Thank you. Thanks. See you next time.